Good evening. So we are starting up again with Monk Chat. So I see people are still trickling in, and so far there's only one question. So just a reminder, for Monk Chat, you can ask any questions you like that are related to Buddhism, however vaguely or remotely. So this is an opportunity to ask Buddhist monks whatever you want to ask Buddhist monks. And in the past, we've normally limited people to 2 questions each to start with. Since attendance is a bit low today, maybe we can dispense with that requirement. So you can ask whatever you want, and we'll take things as they come. So hello, Geeta and Elaine. So the first question is it safe to go out for dana tomorrow morning with the current pandemic situation? No, it's not safe. It never is safe, but it's less safe than usual these days. Nonetheless, we'll take all precautions to minimize risk. We do feel that it's important to continue to present a Buddhist presence in the world, especially these days. And we'll take all precautions we can to try to be safe. So we appreciate your concern. Do you have any thoughts?
Yes. Well, for those who don't know what Gita is referring to, is tomorrow we're going to. Bradley is saying there seems to be a duplicate live stream up with Monk Chat.
This may explain the difficulties. Can you check?
Let me check. But maybe Bante, in the meanwhile, while I check, you can explain what is dana tomorrow.
Yeah, so tomorrow we are going for alms round here in West Orange. So at the farmers market, just a short distance away from the monastery.
Mm-hmm.
And
okay,
yes,
well, people will understand. I
hope. It does look like the Monk Chat tonight got double posted. So hopefully people will notice that there's 2 and they'll come to the correct one. Unless, I hope I didn't make an error and put the wrong one.
You might have clicked the one for next week instead of the one for today.
That's possible. I've done that in the past.
Okay.
Anyway, here we are. There's people trickling in, so I think it's okay. We'll just keep using this one.
Yeah. So tomorrow, great. Mark is saying they found us. Oh, yes, they're here. Okay, 1 second. Let me just write. Okay, explain what alms rounds.
Oh, yes. So alms round. So this is a tradition that goes back to the time of the Buddha. So from the time of the Buddha, Buddhist monks, since we rely on the generosity of lay people for our basic needs, including our food, then traditionally every morning Buddhist monks would go into town with their bowl and collect whatever food people want to share with them. This is a practice which is, it's technically not required. So many monasteries do not do alms round, or they do alms round only once in a while. However, it's a really wonderful way to present a public presence of Buddhist monastics and to help familiarize people with what Buddhist monastics are, and also to start to communicate the relationship of mutual support between monastics and lay people. So the essence of alms round is generosity. It's encouraging the practice of generosity, of caring about others. And for monastics, it's a practice of humility and gratitude, of humbly and gratefully accepting whatever is given to us. So it's a beautiful expression of the integration of Buddhist monks with ordinary society, of the relationship of mutual support between monastics and laity.
Yes, so as Bante mentioned, we're going to use all the precautions. So we're going to be wearing masks. We also do the similar procedures actually when here at the monastery, whenever there are people who are not residents. So Bhante and I are both residents, hence that's why we're without masks right now. And we'll be doing the same tomorrow outside, going to the farmers market and also practicing social distancing. So we hope that everything should be okay, and we have faith that by following all the guidelines, it seems also worldwide that whenever people are actually following the guidelines, the situation is under control. It's only when we're not wearing masks or we're not following social distancing, things get out of control. And Gita is also asking, can we study a sutra on the 7 factors of awakening? Haven't we done that already?
I think we have, but any sutra recommendations you have, feel free to send us an email. We do keep a running file of sutra recommendations. Yeah.
Right. And Mark is saying, by the way, hello to all our friends. Hello to you, Gita, Elaine, Bradley, Mark, Bobby, and Belinda. By the way, alms rounds tomorrow. I think we're going at 9 a.m. in the West Orange Farmers Market.
Yes, we'll be there about 9 a.m.
Yes. Yeah. And if you're local in the evening, we'll also be doing our first evening meditation in the front lawn here at Empty Cloud Monastery. So you can bring a mask and a cushion, somewhere to sit on, and you can join us taking the appropriate distance with everyone else. Hello, Adriana, welcome. So Mark had, I believe, a question. What did the Buddha have to say about the buying and selling of beings? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, that's classified as wrong livelihood. So the buying and selling of living beings is classified as wrong livelihood. So it's unwholesome, it's bad karma, it's not to be done. Yeah.
He's also asking, can you type in any suttas where this attitude is mentioned?
I don't remember off the top of my head. Gabriella, is she here tonight? I don't see her. If she was here, she would probably know off the top of her head. I don't, but if you send me an email, I can send you the reference. Yeah, just off the top of my head, I don't remember. Then there's some happy birthday wishings. So thank you for the birthday wishes. Then
related to that, before we actually go to Elaine's question, Bobby is asking, would that include buying and selling pets?
I would say yes. Yeah. So the pet industry is actually quite horrific. We think of it like, oh, cute little fuzzy puppies and kitties and fish and things. But the industry is quite inhumane, quite horrific. It contributes to the suffering and torment of countless living beings. So it's really not something you want to be involved in. If you want a pet, adopt one. Adopt one from a shelter that would otherwise kill it. So then you're saving a life without contributing to the horrific pet industry. The pet industry is a nightmare. It's really disgusting. So we just see the pretty face of it, which again is these cute little furry things in pet shops. But the industry itself is really awful, really inhumane. You don't want to be involved in it at all.
Yeah. And on top of that, the animals get imprisoned. There are so many different issues. I think a kind of very easy way to see whether something is appropriate or not is thinking, would we want to be in that situation? Would we want to be imprisoned? Would we want to be sold? Would we want to be traded? And I'm pretty sure that if anyone is presented with that option, the answer is thanks, but no thanks. So it comes without saying. So any sentient beings, it doesn't really matter whether it's subtle or gross, humans or non-humans, it's always not a really great idea.
So we had a question up above.
Yes, from Elaine, who was asking, attachment to food, is that driven by greed defilement? Yes. Yes. And yes. And also by delusion. But fundamentally, yes. We are normally when we have attachment to food, which actually not every single person has, there's so many different ways, even amongst non-Buddhists, that people relate to food. So actually, a lot of my friends in my previous life within this life, so that had zero spiritual practice, they all had different relationships with food, different ways to relate to food. And some of them were completely not attached to food. So they would only eat, there's this friend of mine, Samantha, who would only eat the right amount of food necessary for her sustenance. She would always have a natural crave for example, vegetables, like wholesome, healthy whole foods, and hardly ever would she indulge in foods like in junk food, for example. Actually, I don't think I've ever seen her indulge in junk food, because she was very aware of the sort of drawbacks of indulging in that food. And she was really still like having a sort of sense of the flavor of the food, but at the same time not being overly attached or crazy about the food, and always making kind of like the right choice. So when we use food for fun, for pleasure, for adornment, for beauty, instead of for the sustenance of our bodies, and for sustaining our spiritual practices, as the Buddha recommends to do, that's when we talk about attachment to food. And that is because we're constantly craving, we're experiencing dukkha, we're experiencing suffering. And our mind only knows as a way out of suffering more sensual pleasure. So looking for the discomfort to cease by finding comfort in sensual pleasure. And that's where the delusion comes in, thinking that a pleasant feeling will give us, will get rid of our suffering. But in reality, what it does is simply fuel even more our pre-existing tendency, our pre-existing suffering, and our habit of picking whatever sensual pleasure we think is will kind of distract us from experiencing suffering. And so the Buddha always tells us, this is the way of the uninstructed worldling, who gives careless attention to sensual pleasure. So we're kind of like, oh yeah, but there's nothing wrong in eating another cookie. There's nothing wrong in indulging in ice cream. There's nothing wrong in indulging in X, Y, and Z food. You're not, in fact, really killing any human being or living being of any sort. You're not incurring in such bad karma. But what you are doing is strengthening the defilements, strengthening the bad habits, nourishing that greedy mind. And by the more we nourish greed, the more we suffer. And so the Buddha tells us the noble disciple, on the other hand, knows that there is a way out of suffering that does not go in finding more sensual pleasure. It's quite the opposite. We let go of the cause of suffering. That is the way out of suffering. It's not looking for more, looking for something, tangible in terms of sensual pleasure, but rather getting rid of the craving to begin with. So in that way, we uproot our suffering instead of giving it just a little palliative, another temporary sort of distraction.
Okay. And Mark says, I've seen other Buddhist websites refer to the precept of non-killing by saying no unnecessary killing. Any comments? Like protecting a child from a dangerous animal where the only choice is to kill? Yeah, my first comment is that you'll see a lot of misinformation out there, which is quite disappointing. And I've noticed that in particular, when it comes to the precepts, there's a lot of, especially lay teachers, who like to rewrite the precepts to make them more mild. So, for example, rewriting the fifth precept. So the fifth precept very clearly says to refrain from alcohol and from intoxicants which cause negligence. So very clear, don't use alcohol at all. So then I see that being rewritten as don't drink too much alcohol or don't drink to the point of intoxication. So this again is kind of diluting the precept. It's like, well, one glass of wine is okay under that wording, but that's not what the Buddha said. The Buddha said don't use alcohol at all. Similarly, the precept on killing is panatipata veramani, which means refraining from killing living beings. It's very simple. The Buddha doesn't say refrain from a lot of killing or refrain from most killing or only kill when it seems like a good idea. That's not what he says. He says refrain from killing living beings, period, end of story. So whoever is rewriting the precepts is incurring a tremendous amount of bad karma. That is pitiable. That is something that we should have compassion for someone who is corrupting the Dharma in that way. That is not acceptable at all. That is extremely bad karma. So if we don't like the precepts and we don't want to follow them strictly, well, then it's fine to just say that. But it's not fine to claim that the precept is something other than what it is. So I don't know who it is who changed no killing into no unnecessary killing, but that is very bad karma to change the precepts in that way and pretend the precepts are something that they aren't. So even in that case, so say a child is being threatened by a dangerous animal, find a non-lethal way of handling the situation. There's almost always a non-lethal solution. Optimally, try to find a non-violent solution. There's usually a non-violent solution that can be done. And if you do decide to do something violent, even to the point of killing the animal, recognize that you are incurring bad karma. You are breaking the precept. You might be breaking the precept for a good reason, but that doesn't change the fact that you're breaking the precept and incurring bad karma. So there are gradations here. So killing an animal in order to save the life of a child is a mixture of good karma and bad karma. It's nowhere near as bad as, say, a sports hunter who just goes out and kills animals just for the fun of it. That's really bad karma. So it's not killing an animal to save a child is not as bad as sports hunting, but it's still bad. It's still not to be done. It's still something to avoid. And yeah, I find it really disturbing that there are people who will rewrite the Buddha's teachings in order to match their own defilements. It's really unacceptable.
Yeah, sometimes I think it's also a matter of how we interpret it, how we read it. So perhaps, so the Theravada tradition normally is very kind of straight cut, a little bit like how Bhante delivered the explanation of it, as opposed to the Mahayana and the Tibetan. In this realm, especially, they introduce a lot of different subtleties. So I remember reading something along the lines I don't remember the name, the venerable who started Fuguanshan.
Oh, I'm blanking.
Anyway, this
off the top of my head.
Chinese master, and he was really emphasizing, especially in farming, for example, there can be a lot of different insects and creatures that can be harmed through the process of farming. So he really put an emphasis on where our intention is. But it can be a bit of a slippery slope if we are not really watching out. Because obviously karma is an action with intention, not an action without intention. but our intention can be very diluted. Like we can't be exactly quite aware of what we're doing. So the Venerable in this particular case, he was emphasizing the fact that if an animal, for example, was hurt in the process of farming, the person who was farming, unless obviously they deliberately saw the animal, the creature, and killed the creature, the intention of the farmer was not to kill the sentient beings, but was to actually grow food, right? So to nourish others, nourish sentient beings, with the understanding, though, that just by the nature of sustenance of the body, in the process of even harvesting food, like it's even, I remember at the other center where we had this bountiful garden outside, some volunteers went to just simply cut some vegetables outside and washed them and made lunch. And then while I was eating my lunch, I found some dead insects in it. So none of the people involved went there to kill the insect. In fact, it went through so many different stages. Sometimes even when we get food from the farm over here, there are some insects that are floating around. So it's not that, it's just like in the process, they hide, in different leaves and different corners, and they're harmed. But none of these people had the intention to harm the insects. So there are different subtleties. So in that sense, we are indirectly, just by kind of like when we walk outside the street and perhaps we step on some ants. So unless we are deliberately unmindful, then there is a bit of a karmic effect. But if we're actually mindful and we happen to step on an ant and kill it, there is no karmic sort of attribution. So there are subtleties, which sometimes in certain Buddhist traditions, it can get to the point of actually a little bit similar to the description that you said. So you might read that some bodhisattvas might harm certain beings in order to protect other beings for their larger scheme of things. But I would say that for the time being, until we become actual bodhisattvas, our wisdom is not even close to even understand the dynamics that go into play into that. So I personally prefer the straight cut approach that Bhante suggested, but I wanted to clarify that in case you had read it. So it's making sure that you kind of have a better understanding. All right.
Yeah. And Bhavani asks, whenever I see an empty container, I see nothing in it, but I know that there's some space in it. How to contemplate emptiness, space, and nothingness? Well, emptiness, space, and nothingness are actually three different things. So those are three different contemplations you're asking about. So I'll start with space and nothingness because those are easier, and then I'll talk about emptiness afterwards. So space is the void through which things move, the void which physical objects occupy. Similar to air, except air, of course, is a thing that is inside space. So contemplating space is usually done by drawing your attention not to things themselves, but to the space occupied by things. So relating to your body, for example, in terms of the space the body occupies, rather than the physicality of the body itself. And the space is uniform. It's a single uniform field in which physical objects come and go. So contemplating the space element is usually done as part of the meditation on the 6 elements, which I usually teach as an insight practice, a practice of cultivating not self. So seeing our experience as being composed of the 6 elements, earth, water, fire, air, space, and consciousness, and recognizing that each one of the 6 is not me, not mine, not myself. So that's a practice which incorporates awareness of the space element. The other main way it's spoken about in the suttas is as the space kasina, which is using space itself as a samadhi object, as an object for developing pure concentration. That I don't teach. So I don't teach any of the kasina meditations, actually. So I normally teach space as a way of breaking down our sense of self in relationship to the physical world. As for nothingness, nothingness is the complete absence of things, the complete absence of anything. And the meditation on nothingness is, it's actually one of the formless attainments, sometimes called the formless jhanas, the incorporeal jhanas. So those come, it's a list of 4. The first one is the meditation on infinite space. The second is the one on infinite consciousness. And the third is the one on nothingness. So that's also something which I don't teach because it doesn't appear to be directly necessary for attaining enlightenment. In fact, it's quite clear in a few suttas that it's not necessary for enlightenment. So it's not something which I personally have made any effort to develop. Therefore, it's not something I talk about. The meditation on emptiness, on the other hand, is something that I speak about because it's directly relevant to attaining awakening. So emptiness in Pali and Sanskrit is Sunyata. So Sunyata or Shunyata literally can be translated as emptiness, but it does not mean nothingness, and it does not mean space. Rather, Sunyata is referring to that which cannot be defined in terms of existence or non-existence. It's identical to what in Pali is called the asankata dhatu. So the element of that which is unformed, unshaped, unconditioned, unconstructed. That which is not defined in terms of other things, that which is cannot be differentiated, that which cannot be divided, that which is not born and does not die, that which does not come into being and does not cease to be, that which cannot be defined either as existing or as not existing. Which also in the suttas is stated as being identical with nibbana. So the nibbana dhatu, the element of nibbana, is also the asankata dhatu, the element of the unconditioned, the unformed, which then is also synonymous with sunyata, emptiness. So the best way to approach that is through cultivating the recognition of impermanence. So recognizing that all conditional things, all objects, whether physical or mental, are impermanent. They're insubstantial. There's no solidity to them. There's no stability to them. There's no substance to them. And in this way, you can start to develop the recognition that what we normally think of as real, solid, persisting things are actually not real, not solid, and not persisting. And yet they have an apparent existence. This is how we can start to approach the recognition of things as being simultaneously existing and not existing, which is the first major step to directly perceiving emptiness. Okay? I hope that was clear. What else do we have?
There's a bit of...
There's some discussion about how to overcome attachment to food. Actually, there's a few things on that. One thing, again, with attachment to food. So Ayasama was saying, recognizing that food is just meant to sustain our body. So relating to food as fuel rather than as a source of pleasure. So then asking yourself, what do I need in order to keep my body alive? So you might ask yourself that question, and the answer is, I need to eat brown rice and kale. But maybe you don't actually like to eat brown rice and kale. Well, tough. If that's what your body needs, that's what you eat. So not relating to food as a source of pleasure, but rather as a source of health. That can be quite a significant change. Anyway, we should actually just do a whole talk on dealing with food at some point. Greed for food.
We've done it already. No?
Some topics never go out of style.
All right, we'll do it again.
Yeah.
And Michael is asking, will the 6 element meditations, earth, air, water, etc., help with samadhi? I'm asking because it's easier for me to focus in elements meditations than in samadhi body meditations. It's the chicken and the egg sort of question. So personally, being someone who has always had trouble doing cultivating, going straight for samadhi practices, my experience has been, and having a natural sort of inclination to vipassana practices, I would say that there is, at the very beginning, it's very useful to actually create the conditions for the mind to be interested. So go towards what your mind gravitates normally, especially if you have problems doing sort of regular samadhi practice. And as the mind is naturally interested in the object, then you're cultivating both insight and samadhi at the same time. So insight and concentration at the same time. Then as your sort of concentration, ability to concentrate the mind grows with your insight, then it's very important to just try and train the mind to be capable of concentrating without the support of insight. Because actually, truth is that your insight practices will never be deep enough without the strength of samadhi. So in the past, what I found successful was to perhaps still start with some insight practices, but keep it very short. So make a kind of determination at the very beginning. I will prime the mind, get the mind interested, and then switch to the samadhi practice that I have chosen for that period of sit. And that surely, slowly but surely, brings actually a lot of benefits and a lot of strength of mind. That then will help, once again, your insight, and then your insight is going to help your samadhi. It's like washing your hands. You need both, and both will help you. We're doing, especially during the pandemic, a lot of washing of hands. So every time you wash your hands, you can reflect on that. Yeah.
Okay. And one more thing I would add is, in terms of methodology here, with using the elements as a samadhi practice, that usually works best with the first 4, earth, water, fire, and air. So once you're into the meditation and your mind is fixating on the elements practice, pick one of those and focus on clearly feeling it in the body, and keep the mind still and unmoving within an intense awareness of that one element within the body. This is how it can become a very strong samadhi practice. Yep. So what else do we have? Adriana says, yes, please talk of food, would be really appreciated. Well, Adriana, since you're the one who's doing the topics and uploading the talks, then you can put it in whenever you like.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And Sri Lanka is asking, what happens if one is aware either fully or partially throughout the death process? Wait, what happens if one is aware either fully or partially throughout the death process? I have no idea. I don't remember when I went through the death process in the past. Do you want to take this?
Yeah, similarly, I don't know. So this is spoken about a lot in Tibetan Buddhism. It's not spoken about much in other Buddhist traditions. In Tibetan Buddhism, they place a lot of importance on being completely aware as one is dying. And the reason for this is it's said that when the body is dying, then if one is mindful and clearly aware and sees it with wisdom, then that makes it much easier to let go of identification as the body. So for this reason, it's possible to attain stream entry or even full enlightenment at the time of death, if one clearly sees the death process with wisdom. So for this reason, there's a lot of emphasis on it in Tibetan Buddhism. I've heard some Theravada teachers talk about it, but not as much, and not in anywhere near as much detail. So if it's something you're really interested in, I recommend looking at what Tibetan Buddhism has to say on it.
And yes, Gita, I believe it's Venerable Master Xingyun.
That sounds familiar. I think that's the right name.
Yeah. I'm probably butchering the accent because I don't speak Chinese.
I think he's still alive, but he's in his 90s and he's blind. He's very, very frail. So he probably won't be alive for too much longer.
And Adriana is asking, can I ask how you recommend we gauge? Can I ask how you would recommend we gauge when it's time to push ourselves and when it's time to rest? I have been having a lot of trouble with this lately. Well, what I find helpful is to follow what Ajahn Chah in one of his talks, recorded talks, he speaks about in terms of relating to our mind as if it were a child. So with a child, you want to have, unless you want to be one of those obnoxious parents of present times that kind of like, which is actually what we normally do with our minds. Now that I think about it, we just let the mind do whatever it wants, go, think, and do. And in fact, our mind is a total mess, and it's very difficult to spend time with the mind. So a lot of the of children today in Western society, because there are some sort of psychology books that encourage that type of thinking, like the child is completely unruly and will start throwing forks and knives to people on the street if they're sitting at a restaurant just because they feel like it, and the parents won't do anything about it. So we don't want to do that. We want to have a balanced we want to develop enough wisdom to understand, just like we would with a child, when it's time to tell the child, no, right now, this is not the time to do this. And when, on the other hand, we don't want to be too strict and we want to be gentle and kind. So really, your question is push yourselves and when it's time to rest. So see the reactions. What is your current state of mind? So if you push yourself, is that bringing wholesome results? Are you actually getting more wisdom, more concentration? Are your mind states becoming more wholesome? Or are you increasing the agitation, the nervousness, the sort of sense of guilt, the dissatisfaction with yourself? So if it's the former, then you can keep on pushing yourself. If it's the latter, then you're like, maybe right now it's actually better to be gentle with myself. Maybe it's time to take a little break and recollect my own goodness. So always have a little bit of push and a little bit of relax, a little bit of push and a little bit of relax. And once again, the way that you understand what is the right course of action is to look at your mind and be quite honest with what is currently happening, instead of just going, oh yeah, I want now to push. I can't do this. Oh, so let me push more. That means I need to push more. No, that is the path to craziness. It's not the path to liberation.
Okay, and Bhavani says, whenever I see Buddhist flag colors, I remember the good virtues each color represents. Is this correct? Or should I be unattached to colors? Yeah, that's correct. That's the purpose of the Buddhist flag, is to remind you of the good qualities of the Buddha. So that's helping you practice Buddhanusati, which the Buddha says is very wholesome, very supportive of Buddhist practice. So recollecting the good qualities of the Buddha is it's conducive to enlightenment. So that has nothing to do with being attached to colors. It has to do with practicing the recollection of the Buddha and recollection of the Buddha's good qualities. So yeah, absolutely. When you see Buddhist flags, think about the Buddha. That's what they're for. Yeah, no problem.
And Mark says, I have a friend that believes they encountered some non-human being while asleep. They felt were very real and could feel their presence after waking. Did the Buddha mention how to deal with this?
So the Buddha spoke quite a bit about interactions with non-human beings, especially devas. Spirits that live slightly more pleasant lives than humans, and who humans interact with sometimes. And also, to some degree, interacting with lower spirits, in particular, petas, which are hungry ghosts, they're usually called. It's just something that happens. The Buddha didn't really speak much about either encouraging or discouraging interaction with non-human beings. He's quite clear that it's possible and it does happen. And some people have more interactions with non-human beings than others do. It's not something that's either inherently good or inherently bad. The question is, how are we relating to it? Are we relating to it in a wholesome way or in an unwholesome way? So if this is what's going on in your friend's life, then the question they need to ask is, how can I relate to this in a wholesome way? But also recognizing that it's nothing special. It's nothing important. It doesn't make him more spiritually developed than anybody else. It's just an ability that some people get and some people don't. But again, it has nothing to do with attaining enlightenment. So it's not something to place too much importance on, or really any importance at all. Those are my thoughts.
Mark is also asking, any prayers or meditations for this?
Well, it depends. If your friend is scared, or if he believes that the beings are hostile in any way, then the standard recommendation is to recite the Metta Sutta and to practice a lot of loving kindness meditation. Another thing which helps a lot is reciting the recollection of Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. Or if he has any connection with Mahayana, then reciting bodhisattvas. So reciting the name of Guanyin, or homage to Guanyin, praises to Guanyin. That can be very helpful. Again, if it seems like a hostile being, then Jizo Bodhisattva might be relevant. Ditsang Pusa. But yeah, kind of your standard basic one is the Metta Sutta and the recollections of Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. Yeah.
What about the recollection of the Devas? Would it play something here?
Well, it depends on what you're trying to do. So if the Devas seem like... so the recollection of the Devas, the way the Buddha describes it, it's recollecting the various categories of devas, but in particular, it's recognizing that the virtue and goodness which led to those beings being reborn as devas is also present within us. So the purpose of the recollection of the devas is actually about reminding ourselves that we have the merit and goodness necessary in order to be reborn as a deva. So recollection of the devas is actually not so much about the devas as it is about building up our self-confidence and our sense of self-worth. So I don't think it's really that relevant in this case, except maybe if there seem to be good devas and the person's really enamored with them, then recollecting that cultivating good spiritual qualities, wholesome spiritual qualities, is what leads to Deva existence, that might be worth doing. That it might encourage them to practice wholesome conduct of body, speech, and mind. Okay, what's next?
And Bobby is asking, I do a meditation where I focus on the solidity of the ground I am sitting on and try to melt into the ground. Is this earth meditation? Well, depending on what you mean by trying to melt into the ground. So if you're like starting with visualizations and tripping and kind of spacing out, then not. But if you're focusing on the solidity of the body and the same nature of your body being of the same nature of the earth, and it becoming sort of understanding direct knowledge of direct sensation, direct feeling of there not being any difference, then my understanding is that yes, you are in fact practicing the earth element meditation.
Yeah.
It's also approved by Bhavani.
Yeah. Yeah. And Bhavani says, thank you for clearing my Vichikitcha. I wonder, how do you work to develop so much knowledge? I don't have teachers. How to develop knowledge like you developed? Well, it takes a while, but for one thing, read the suttas. So commit to reading the suttas every day and read through them cover to cover. So especially the Majjhima Nikaya, the Samyutta Nikaya, and the Anguttara Nikaya, read them cover to cover without missing anything. That helps tremendously. Also listen to Dhamma talks, have discussions with monastics, that helps. And most importantly, practice the Noble Eightfold Path. Live the Noble Eightfold Path. Yeah.
Okay, and Michael is asking, is breath counting still Vipassana meditation? Counting your breaths from 1 to 10 and starting over again? My understanding is that that is not insight meditation. That is a way to train the mind at the very beginning to stay with the object. But fundamentally, the realm of insight meditation is when we start contemplating the 3 characteristics. So impermanence. So if you start looking at the breath and seeing how every single breath is different from one another, how we have zero control over it. We can't really, I can't decide to stop breathing, and I can't decide really to breathe, if you know what I mean. Like it will kind of happen by default due to causes and conditions of having this body, right? So that's when we understand that something that we think we have ownership of, that we identify with, is not, in fact, who we are, or it doesn't belong to us. It's not who we think. It doesn't define us. And, this is not just the theory, but actually like a direct, once again, perception of this. And then also, of course, when we start looking at the nature of suffering, of dukkha, of how both pleasant and unpleasant the process of breathing is actually. So breath meditation the breath is an incredible object if used skillfully, to be both a vehicle to cultivate vipassana, and at the same time to cultivate tranquility, and at the same time to cultivate concentration.
Yeah. So similarly, I would say quite simply, counting the breath is not Vipassana meditation, but it is a helpful way of preparing the mind for Vipassana meditation. So counting the breath is primarily about developing sati, and to some extent samadhi, so mindfulness and concentration. Dropping the breath counting, so dropping the counting and just staying with the breathing, then it becomes more of a samadhi practice. And then if you incorporate things like the contemplation of impermanence, and not self, as Ayasoma was saying, then it's a vipassana practice, an insight practice. It's a little confusing these days because these days people tend to use the word vipassana to just mean all forms of Theravada meditation, but that's not correct. Vipassana technically refers only to the specific methods which are meant to destroy the defilements through direct wisdom. So that does not include samadhi practices.
And Sri Lanka is asking, I like your nickname, by the way. I doubt your name is Sri Lanka, but if your name is Sri Lanka, very cool too. Is there an intermediate state after death? Seems like Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism have different understandings of it. I heard that in Burmaites believe that people become birds in that state. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, definitely no. So whoever told you that in Burma they believe people become birds, I don't know what they're talking about. So being reborn as a bird is a particular possible rebirth. It's rebirth as an animal in the animal realm, which is actually the result of bad karma. So the Buddha was very clear that being reborn as an animal is not desirable. It's an unpleasant state of affliction, which happens as the result of bad karma. It's not something that we want to seek out. So as for an intermediate state between births, again, it's spoken about in detail in Tibetan Buddhism. And the Pali Canon is mentioned briefly in a small number of places and never explained. So there's been debate in Theravada circles for approximately 2,500 years as to just what the heck the Buddha was talking about when he mentioned an intermediate state. And many scholars actually just come to the conclusion that he didn't actually mean that when he said it. So a lot of Theravada scholars will just say there is no intermediate state between lives. But that doesn't change the fact that it is mentioned in a few places in the Pali Canon. But again, with no explanation. Explanations you'll find in Tibetan Buddhism. For some reason, they really like getting into the little details of death and dying. Whereas I'm actually a little bit more interested in what's going on right now and how I can incline the mind right now towards awakening. So is there an intermediate state between lives? Quite likely, quite possible. We'll deal with that when we get there. For now, we should be a lot more concerned about this state right now. What's going on right now? And how can we use right now to incline the mind towards awakening?
Great. Okay. And then Mark was asking about the suttas that you mentioned, and I see that everybody is being extremely proactive. Sadhu, 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 Bradley. Great. And Ms. Lee Knight is very good. All the different mentions about the different suttas. That's wonderful.
Great.
And yes, we agree with Bradley that Sutta Central is a good database for the entire Sutta Pitaka. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And that's the end of the questions. So if there's no more questions in the next few seconds, then we'll go ahead and close for the evening. So thank you all for joining in. Oh, there's something more. Bobby says, is there validity in psychic speaking with dead people? My family swears by some psychics, but this seems contradictory to the Dhamma/rebirth. It's actually not contradictory to the Dhamma or to rebirth. However, the usefulness and validity of it is questionable. So can humans interact with beings in other realms? Yes. Can humans speak to spirits? Yes. Can humans speak to devas? Yes. Can humans track the rebirth of a particular person and speak with the rebirth of a particular person? Yes, though now we're starting to get into much more difficult and precise territory. However, I don't personally have much experience with these domains, but I've had some conversations with monks who do. And what they've told me is that the majority of the time, the psychic is not interacting with the spirit of the dead person, They're interacting with some other spirit. They're interacting with some other deva, or sometimes with a being from one of the lower realms. And that is a bit more problematic. So you think the psychic is talking to the spirit of your dead grandmother, but actually they're just talking to some random deva or some random ghost, which may or may not give any information that's even remotely useful. And that's the other thing, is the information that you're getting through spirits. Just because it's coming from a spirit doesn't mean it's reliable. Spirits are just as delusional and unenlightened as everybody else, possibly more so in some cases. So I'm not personally inclined to trust something just because the spirit says it. Is it possible for some well-attuned people to communicate with spirits? Yes. Is it useful? Not really. Those are my thoughts.
Right. And Sri Lanka says, when practicing meditation intensely, I find it difficult to talk to people due to being mindful and just experiencing sound and seeing the person. What can I do about it? Keep doing what you're doing. Sounds great.
Yeah, this is also one of the reasons why meditation retreats are silent. So then you don't have to worry about people talking to you or you trying to talk to people while keeping your mindfulness. But yeah, maintaining mindfulness and samadhi during conversation is incredibly difficult. Very, very, very difficult, very advanced practice. So of course it's difficult. Of course that's challenging. That's not surprising. Don't worry about it. Keep up your practice.
All right. So Adriana says, okay, last question, if I may. You can also ask more questions if you like, Adriana. No problem. I have been struggling to build contentment with how much I'm practicing in daily life. I often feel like I didn't apply what I've learned enough, or it didn't help enough, etc.
Well, first off, Adriana, rejoice in all that you do. Rejoice in all the practice that you do. Rejoice in all the knowledge that you have. Rejoice in your ongoing commitment to the Dhamma. Rejoice in your morality. Rejoice in all your wonderful good qualities in line with the Dhamma. Instead of thinking, oh, I'm not doing enough, instead think, I'm doing so much that's good. This is wonderful. Instead of thinking, oh, I'm not perfect yet, instead think, oh, I've practiced so much and so hard and so diligently, and I've made so much progress. So remember to focus on your good qualities and your progress in your development. And then, of course, it's good to do more, but it's also important to be content with the fact that we're going in the right direction. Remember, this is not a race. There's no hurry. You can't force it anyway. You just point the mind in the right direction and you keep moving. Sometimes you'll move slowly and sometimes you'll move quickly, but the important thing is that you keep moving in the right direction. So rejoice in the fact that you're on the path and that you're going in the right direction. So maybe you're not doing as much as you could. Oh well. Just keep going in the right direction with a relaxed sense of self-confidence, a relaxed sense of confidence in the Dhamma, and a appreciation for your own goodness.
And Bradley is saying, similar to Adriana, I sometimes get this feeling that I need to read all the Dhamma books, do all the meditations, listen to all the Dhamma talks, and practice, and get discouraged because time is limited. How to deal with this? Well, looking at it and seeing, what is my mind doing? Has a tendency towards greed. So you're it's both a good wholesome thing to kind of use our sort of defilements for the pursuit of something wholesome and good, like studying the Dhamma, but at the same time, we also don't want to be tricked by our kilesas. Our kilesas, our defilements are always there, like creating all these intricate ways to fool us, together with Mara. So actually, there's this beautiful practice that Catholic monks do, which is called Lectio Divina. We were talking about it actually here at the monastery this morning. Lectio Divina is the translation is lesson from God. Fundamentally, what they do in Catholic communities is to read just one verse in the morning, like the community of monastics comes together, only one verse from the Bible, the New Testament, or whatever, and contemplate it throughout the day. And they actually, as a community, they recite the verse in the morning. Then they practice during the day by themselves. Then they meet again at lunchtime and they recite again the verse. And they go and practice by themselves. And then halfway in the afternoon, they recite the verse again. They contemplate and they keep their practice again until the evening. So basically, the purpose of that is to really get deeply into the insight of what is this lesson from God. And I think that's easily actually translatable to Buddhist practice, and I actually find it quite beautiful. And I don't currently do this practice. I've done it in like short amounts of time, but I'm hoping actually to pick it up, either by myself or as a community, if my other fellow monastics here at the Cloud will be willing to do that. Because actually, I find it very powerful. It's not true, actually, that I don't do it myself. I do it, but not in this sort of very systematic way. But I find it sometimes very powerful. And instead of accumulating so much knowledge, to actually really reflect and contemplate on a few verses over and over again, reading them over and over again, because there will be more and more insights that will come through that, more investigation. So in a certain sense, sometimes less is more. And that's what also the Buddha actually recommends in a sutta that right now I don't remember which one it is. But in essence, basically what he says, it's better to actually master the understanding of one teaching, really fully get it, than to accumulate and to practice in accordance to Dhamma, very importantly, than to accumulate all the knowledge, the intellectual knowledge on the Dhamma. Because fundamentally, it's all well and good to know a lot about the Dhamma, but what we're trying to do is realize the Dhamma for ourselves, really see it for ourselves. We're not trying to impress others. We're not even trying to impress ourselves. What we're trying to do is really seeing things as they are. And in that way, when we start practicing this way, also that kind of greed to accumulate knowledge, and having that sense of, there's no time to do all of this unless I become a scholar with whatever scholarship fund and such place. All of that, that's another form of craving for a different state of being, right? So all of that, we sweep it on the side and really go, actually, all of these teachings are alive. They're real. They're something beneficial. They're like medicine. Who cares about reading all the different labels of all the medicines and all the instructions? If you're sick, you want to take that medicine and drink it. So let us all drink the medicine of the Buddha.
And Bhavani says, how will Path of Purification book help my mind? So the Path of Purification is, in Pali, it's called Visuddhimagga. So that's a book that was written 1,000 years after the Buddha. It claims to be a summary of the Buddha's teachings, and it does contain a lot of information from the Buddha, but it's also mixed in with a lot of the author's own opinions, and I don't usually recommend it because in many ways that book tends to create more confusion than clarity in people's minds. So I don't particularly recommend reading the Visuddhimagga. I think it's much better to read the suttas and to read the teachings of modern meditation masters, so monks who teach meditation, and also listen to Dhamma talks from contemporary monks. But I don't particularly recommend the Visuddhimagga. I wasn't impressed by it. I know it's been pretty popular for the last 1500 years, but I don't personally like it at all. And none of my teachers liked it either. So I come from a lineage of people who don't like the Visuddhimagga, so I'm not a fan.
And Mark says, so a Zen practitioner I like, Adyashanti, often refers to letting the universe or this greater intelligence run his life. Did the Buddha ever refer to this greater intelligence? So I will start by saying that I am not terribly familiar with Adyashanti in the way that I don't listen to his talks, and I'm not a particular fan myself. But what I've heard, and from the few glimpses I saw of quotes here and there, is that while he does have some sort of form of Buddhist practice, he actually also has Hindu practice, right? And he also has different New Age beliefs. So it's a bit of it across the spectrum of the spiritual world. So I'm a bit more of a purist. So as I always say, I'm very monogamous. I'm only interested in Buddhism in that respect. Within Buddhism, I am polyamorous. I love the Theravada tradition. I love Mahayana. I love Vajrayana, but it's all all the same matrix. So if there are kind of apparent conflicts sometimes, actually the more one compares, understands, deepens the knowledge, the more actually they're all talking about the same thing in different forms. When it comes to especially Hinduism and Buddhism, and I think we spoke about that somewhat recently. Yes, with some friends who came and visited a while back. It can be very, very tricky because the terminology is similar. There are obviously they were also, even in Hinduism, there's lots of what we call Hinduism. In reality, there are all lots of different spiritual beliefs and different sects and different philosophies, but they all kind of came into being pretty much around the same time, and then it evolved in different ways. So a parallel that is very useful to me is actually the Abrahamic religions. So for example, there is Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. They all have lots of things in common, and they also have lots of different things that distinguish one and the other. And if one starts picking something from Islam and mixing it with Christianity and mixing it with Judaism, there can be a lot of confusion and conflict happening. So getting back to the question that you said about the universe or this greater intelligence running his life, I think that actually my understanding is that the Buddha says that is wrong view. So that there's not, once again, we're constantly looking for something else. And perhaps also in meditation, sometimes we can have this perception that we're one with the world, we're one with the universe. But also that is actually another form of identity, another idea. I am the universe. The universe is me. I exist, and this is the shape and form that I exist with. Or a sort of somewhat reliance to a more powerful being. So another definition of God. So that's not quite what we're trying to do with meditation practice. That's actually something that the Buddha warns us that can happen, and that is a delusion. And we might think that is it, but in reality, that is actually something that we need to overcome. We need to transcend in order to attain awakening. Any other?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Sri Lanka asks, when meditating, I see intentions all the time. They are like background processes happening on their own accord. The body can't do anything without the mind. Why is it like that? Well, I don't think it's useful to ask, why is it like that? Because the body is what it is and the mind is what it is. More useful is to ask, what can I do that will lead towards awakening? Otherwise, there's no end to the question, why is it this way? Why is it that way? Then you just wind up becoming a physicist and a physiologist and a psychologist and you this and that. And you'll just waste away your life learning a bunch of useless things. Much better is to ask, what can I do that will lead towards awakening? That's much better.
Great.
Okay.
Where is it? Oh, Manny says, oh, but first Bradley says, the Mahadukkha Kanda Sutta will be my focus text. Thumbs up, thumbs up. And Mani says, lockdown has weakened practice. No Sangha to attend. Any tips on how to resume practice? Well, you're doing it right now. So keep doing it. Sometimes we think that there have to be certain conditions in place. But a lot of times that's not realistic, So we have to make the best out of the conditions that are currently present, that whatever we have available. And actually, I have to say that going through a pandemic in 2020 in this respect is significantly better than any pandemic that has happened throughout the period of time that we have memory and history, because of the internet, because of the facility that we have to actually practice together, even though we're in separate locations. 100 years ago, it was definitely not the case. So really do the best out of the current conditions. And understand that, sometimes even when we think that we're backsliding in practice, that's still part of the practice, because it also makes us realize the importance of the Dhamma. It makes us realize how precious it is to have spiritual friends. Whenever we don't have food is when we get hungry, right? And we stop craving all the junk food and we're like, oh, I really need some nutriment rather than something fun to snack with. Or also water. When we're really, really thirsty, hardly we're like thinking about drinking any kind of weird sort of fruity drink. What we want is actually water. Water is what will quench the thirst. So it's the same way right now. There's a lot of dukkha and there's a lot of issues. And so it's a great opportunity to really see the preciousness of our human birth, of our human life, the preciousness of the Dhamma, the fact that we have encountered these teachings, and really commit to practicing the Dhamma, regardless of the conditions. We could die. Actually, I was doing it during the retreat lately. I was really contemplating every breath that is going to be my last breath. And how did I want to die? Did I want to die confused, spacing out, agitated, running around with whatever thought, craving to do X, Y, and Z? Or did I want to actually die, be my last breath, to be present, understanding, knowing? So yeah, it's a very good recollection, especially now that it's really, the struggle is real. It's not something that we're just like, oh yeah, I'm going to die. No, I'm going to die. That's for sure. And there are people dying and it's like pretty intense.
Okay. And hello, Kevin. And that's the end of the questions. So I think we'll go ahead and end at this time. So thank you everyone for joining in. It's always delightful, these online sessions. So that's it for this week. We'll pick up again next Wednesday with our usual sutta study and evening meditation. So hope to see you all then. So we'll end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu. Sadhu.
Sadhu.
Sadhu. Okay, have a great night.